Do you get why people will find it hard to believe that you just didn't watch ISIS propaganda in London?
Yes, I understand why, because they weren't 15 and they want me. They don't know my situation, you know. Maybe more people have access to, I mean, especially journalists, they don't understand why I wouldn't know, because they're journalists, they search the deepest, darkest parts of the internet for all these videos, and they know every single detail about ISIS, so why would I not know?
I mean, these videos were on Twitter and YouTube, so it didn't require...
But they were constantly being taken down and like deleted, so it was very hard to watch these videos. And the people who I was talking to who were in ISIS didn't send these videos.
Shamima Begum has claimed that she didn't see the sort of videos of people being executed that were so widely publicised. Do you think that's true?
Don't believe it. And no reasonable person would believe it. However, however much you're a teenager watching at home with the Kardashians, doing loads of stuff on social media, being physically welded to your mobile phone, nobody, particularly 3 intelligent students from East London, could have been absolutely oblivious to the horrors that were being waged by Daesh out in Syria and Iraq at that time. Just doesn't wash.
Did you know what Islamic State were doing when you left for Syria? Because they had beheaded people, there were executions.
Yeah, I knew about those things and I was okay with it.
You say that one of the reasons that you joined the Islamic State was because you watched some beheading videos. Is that right?
I mean, not just the beheading videos, you know, the videos they show of like families and stuff in the park, you know, the good life that they can provide for you and all that. And not just the fighting videos, but yeah, the fighting videos.
Documentary filmmaker Alan Duncan is set to reveal damning eyewitness accounts that put Shamima Begum at the heart of terrorist training camps in Syria, where she would have learned to use guns and even build suicide vests. Alan, a former British soldier who later fought alongside ISIS, alongside the Kurds, went on to undertake painstaking interviews with Yazidi sex slaves who suffered at the hands of the group. His latest bombshell interview with a young woman who was kept prisoner by ISIS for 7 years reveals Begum was even friends with a slave master who oversaw the rape and kidnap of girls as young as 14. So look, Alan, your findings about Begum are incredibly shocking. I think it's so important that you've done this work because, of course, what we've seen over the past couple of months, Alan, is this attempt by the BBC, or the British Bashing Corporation, as I call it, to rehabilitate Begum, to try and claim that she's just a victim. So please reveal exactly what you've found out.
Actually, this witness that is on camera, all she's done is confirm what I've been told by other witnesses. However, they can't go on camera because they're involved in trials, or they yet again got family members held still by ISIS. But yeah, and one of them was telling me that Begum was even trying to recruit ISIS females as suicide attackers. Wow. And I've got that on camera.
Wow. And so these are people who were effectively ISIS prisoners of war who you're now speaking to?
You can't even call it prisoners of war. The Yazidis were captured en masse in 2014. When the world woke up to ISIS on that mountain, that was the Yazidis you've seen fleeing. Women and children getting sold by ISIS. That's the Yazidis. You can't call them prisoners of war. They were basically sex slaves, raped and abused for years by ISIS males, and there's not an ISIS one single, okay. There's not a female, there's not one Western female that was not involved in that slavery also. In fact, the Yazidis have told me in many ways the women were, in some cases, worse than the men.
And what we're seeing on camera here, Alan, is you actually showing some of these victims pictures of Shamima Begum. So can you go into a little bit more detail about what they told you about Begum's activities? Because, of course, we've always suspected, we've always had hints at the fact that she was helping male suicide bombers. She was even potentially putting them into suicide vests. But what you've found out actually moves this on, doesn't it? It shows that she was actively involved in the ISIS terror campaign.
Yes, she was actively involved. What set the alarm bells off for me, to be honest, was her husband. When I interviewed her husband, he confirmed to me that she was getting wages from ISIS whilst he was seemingly in prison. Now, I know from interviewing other ISIS, you weren't getting a wage for sitting at home. You had to be actively involved within the organization. So I've been told that she was in sharia classes. She was getting trained in weapons. Suicide belts were standard, normal thing there. But I've also been told that she was actively trying to recruit females. Her friend was selling Yazidi women and children. Now, the witness said to me, I can't say that they were best friends outside of the classes. However, only the two of them were hanging about. If they were hanging about together in the classes, trust me, they were best of friends outside. But her husband also, his reaction during the interview as well to the Yazidis, that set alarm bells for myself as well.
Indeed, indeed. So actually, it looks like Begum, and there is her ex-husband, by the way, who you interviewed, it looks like Begum could actually have been far more involved in the terrible, despicable deeds of ISIS than has previously been reported. So how do you feel, Alan, when you see the BBC doing what I have described as some sort of propaganda puff piece to try and paint Begum as a victim? Because I believe you had some harsh words for her previously.
Oh, yeah. Well, what can I say? It's not only the BBC. You've got the Times that made her into a front page cover, as if she's some sort of
cover girl,
there's a whole agenda.
Cover girl.
There's a drip feeding agenda within the mainstream media. You've got Reprieve, you've got the BBC, you've got the Times, you've got other journalists within that clique as well. They're all trying to drip feed you that ISIS females are now suddenly victims because they fell for the bull. They fell for that bullshit. I witnessed that change at the very start when I was interviewing them. Suddenly they were, instead of saying, well, I had one that said to me, they weren't sex slaves, they were slaves that you could have sex with. That, for me, sums up all the Western ISIS, including Shamima Begum. They didn't have a problem. But tell me something, this mainstream media bleating for Shamima Begum, an ISIS terrorist, and also, it's not about Begum only. She gets back, they all get back, and not one of them will stand trial. Samia Hussein's the perfect example to why they won't stand trial.
Of course. And we will end up funding her for the rest of her days if she ends back in this country. Look, final word, Alan. You actually believe ISIS brides like Shamima Begum would pose a clear and present threat to British security if they were allowed back into the country. Why?
You have to bear in mind, with ISIS, it's not a lost war, it's a lost battle. They think a generation ahead, whereas you and me think a month ahead, a week ahead. For ISIS, it's a long-term goal. Their loyalty is to the caliphate. It's not to Britain. It's not to the country that they come from. It's to the caliphate, no matter how long it takes.
Really disturbing stuff. Incredible work exposing the truth of Shamima Begum, which for some reason the BBC refuses to do. Really, really pleased that you've shared your shocking findings with us tonight. That is the documentary filmmaker Alan Duncan.
Is there any doubt whatsoever about it being this woman?
I am very certain.
What was she being taught?
They were learning about weapons. The groups would be separated, but when we learnt about Sharia, we would all come together.
Was there any suicide belts, anything like that being taught?
It was always a thing. They taught everyone about the suicide belts, and they kept suicide belts with them.
Why was that woman in the photo that you sent back, and you said you recognise her from that? Why did you pick her
This woman, Shamima, I recognised her and she was friends with Amira.
Huraira. Huraira. Where was this Huraira? Where was she from?
She was a German woman. She was learning as well in the class. And she was one of the people who sells Yazidis.
How do you know she was selling Yazidis?
My sister was captured by her.
Your sister? Where's your sister now?
I don't know.
If there is any doubt whatsoever, you have to tell me. If there's even 1% doubt, you have to tell me that it was this woman in that class.
I have no doubt, I'm very certain.
So she stood out because the German woman that she was with was the one that was holding and sold your sister.
Yes.
We've just talked about Shamima Begum. You've known her from when she was been taught weapons, when she was been taught sharia. Okay. What do you think of this?
It is fake by Begum. Living with ISIS women and ISIS in general, I understand how they think and how loyal they are to their sharia ideas, even if they are not in ISIS. I do not think they have an open mentality, and those clothes do not represent her, I am certain. They are faking facts. Women of ISIS will never change. They still believe in what they believe. Many of them still in the camps believe ISIS will rise again.
Did you receive any form of training? Were you given any of that?
No. Not at all.
كنا بمثل معسكر تدريب، نحن بس بنات طبعا لأنه ممنوع، فكانت هي شايلة النقاب عن وجهها، فأنا هون شفت شكلها تمام. كل البنات اللي بيجوا كبداية على داعش أول مرة تمام بينخرطوا بهذا المعسكر.
Was Shamima part of Hizbah?
هي إذا كانت جزء منهم أو لا أنا ما سألتها.
Were you ever a member of Hizbah, ISIS's religious police?
No.
So there's a woman in Hizbah who says she saw you receiving some training.
No.
No?
When I first crossed the border.
At any point during your time in ISIS?
I mean, I'd like to specifically know when so I can say what I was doing instead.
Okay, let me rephrase it. Any time during your life in ISIS, were you given any form of either religious training or weapons training?
No.
Nothing at all?
Nope.
Do you feel that it is fair to prosecute you for being a member of ISIS?
No.
You don't feel it's fair to prosecute you for being a member of ISIS?
No. We crossed the border. It was just a big field of nothing. And there were like men wearing all black with their faces covered with guns on the arms. And it was just a bit surreal, you know, seeing it in person.
What are you thinking?
I mean, at that time it was kind of exciting.
Really?
It was kind of exciting, yeah. It was different. It was...
You weren't thinking these men are dangerous, these are potential terrorists?
No, I thought they're here to protect me. They have these guns to protect me and to protect women like me.
Were you getting paid? Was she getting your wages?
Yes.
How does that work? Yeah.
Yes, my friend was getting my wage and her wage. Luckily, they did give that, yeah.
Both of you get the same. Both of you get a wage. Both of you get the same. Both of you get a wage.
This is as near to a sad face I can find in all the footage. And the eyes are down, the lips are arched, but they're not down in a reliable form, but pulled by these muscles, depressor muscles that pull the lip corners down. She's forming this pitiful face, and it's been posed because we can see it's being created by the chin boss being pushed upwards. When we see children do that, we call it a pout or a sulk. So this was a very poor attempt from Begum to try and display sadness, to attract sympathy, to have her case reheard, appealed, to allow her to move into the UK.
Did you ever see executions?
No. Saw a beheaded head.
On the one hand, the severed head unfazed you, and on the other hand, you are angry about oppression.
Because it's one thing, because you have to remember that these people, their beliefs are that you kill the non-Muslims, but you treat the Muslims, you know, good.
Was there a point where you started to have second thoughts about your life in Islamic State, under Islamic State?
Just only at the end, like after my son died.
When she first emerged from the ashes of the so-called ISIS caliphate, she showed little remorse.
I don't regret it because it's changed me as a person. It's made me stronger, tougher. You know, I married my husband. I wouldn't have found someone like him back in the UK.
The Telegraph has obtained exclusive video from Raqqa in Syria, which purports to show at least 2 of the Bethnal Green schoolgirls who left London in February to join the Islamic State. The footage shows 3 women walking through Raqqa, and one of them is armed with a Kalashnikov.
Innocent people did get killed. It's one thing to kill a soldier that is fighting you, you know, it's self-defense, but to kill people like women and children, just like people, you know, like the women and children in Baghuz that are being killed right now, unjustly, by the bombings. It's a two-way thing, really, because women and children are being killed back in the Islamic State right now. And it's kind of retaliation. Yeah, I will admit I was the one that made the choice. Even though I was only 15 years old, I do have, like, I could make my own decisions back there. I do have the like mentality to make my own decisions, and I did leave on my own, knowing that it was a risk. But yeah, I will admit it's my fault right now. I just want forgiveness, really, from the UK.
Shamima, you seem to say you don't know a lot. The Manchester bombing was the murder of 22 people, including children. The youngest victim was 8 years old. More than 1,000 people were injured. It was a horrific attack. And for you to have said that there was a justification sickened everybody who heard what you said. And people find it hard to believe when you say, I didn't know about ISIS. I didn't know it was a death cult. I didn't know about the dreadful things that happened. And now you're saying you didn't know about the Manchester bombing. People are going to find it sickening to hear you claim ignorance of those things.
Well, when I was 15 and I was doing my research on ISIS, most of the research I was getting was from people online in ISIS, because I thought that would be the most reliable source.
What was it that attracted you? Was it from watching videos? Was there somebody who recruited you, or a cleric who recruited you? What was it that prompted a 15-year-old girl to go to Syria?
During the time I left, you know, Dawla was on the news and stuff, and like a lot of videos were coming out, and I saw all the videos on the internet, and that just kind of attracted me to them.
Guys, you have a hawala? You have a hawala, Shamima? No? Okay.
Here I have just 1/3.
Sorry?
Here I have just 1/3.
1,000?
1/3. 1 kg. They give me 300.
Who give you?
No, it's my family.
It's your family. From where?
France.
Huh?
France.
France, okay.
The Home Secretary says he'll revoke her British citizenship, but he's indicated that Shamima Begum's newborn son can return.
Would you be prepared to let the son go to the UK if he has... You wouldn't. He would stay with you.
My name is Vineet Malhotra. As the BBC barely recovers from the outrage over its clear-cut propaganda documentary designed to malign India and Prime Minister Modi, the BBC has landed in trouble, well, once again. This time for giving an ISIS terrorist, a jihadi bride, their platform and sympathizing with her. Shamima Begum was, in fact, she fled the United Kingdom as a teenager and took the decision to join the ISIS back in 2015 with her friends. She got married to an ISIS terrorist in Syria. The sympathetic depiction of the jihadi bride, who has been remorseless over her joining the ISIS terror group, has left viewers fuming in the United Kingdom. This comes after a report by the UK government stating that Islamist terrorism, the greatest and deadliest threat facing the United Kingdom. The BBC has taken a tone-deaf approach to the issue of terrorism. Now, viewers across the nation are threatening to withdraw their subscription to the BBC. What's going on over here? What is the agenda that the BBC is actually looking to foment, and why are they hell-bent on disrespecting countries that perhaps have done no harm to them, and eulogizing countries and agendas and forums and platforms that perhaps want them hurt? Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former diplomat, joins me on the show. Rajalakshmi Joshi, political analyst, also with us on the program. Rashmi Sawant, human rights defender, joins us on the program as well. And last but by no means the least, Major Muhammad Ali Shah, defense expert, Impar Media panelist, also joining us on this all-important conversation. Ambassador Mukherjee, ma'am, I'd like to begin with you. What is happening over here? It completely seems that the BBC at this point in time is without any reins. They seem to be, banging into pillars and walls like a headless chicken. But at the same time, this agenda that they have adopted, it is definitely going to put India on the wrong side of things as they stand today.
Well, first of all, the agenda they have adopted is putting the BBC on the wrong side of the viewers in the UK, and they are dependent on the license fees which British viewers pay to watch BBC, because they have taken what they term as investigative neutral journalism too far. That's the answer which they gave when they were asked about the documentaries on Prime Minister Modi 1 and 2. And this is the response I'm sure they will give when they are challenged about this documentary. Because what the BBC apparently seems to have forgotten is that investigative journalism does not mean that you should sympathize with causes which have the potential to destroy your society, to destroy freedom of press by which you are there, and to eulogize those who believe in terror, murder and destruction. In this particular case, this woman, Shamima Begum, when she joined in 2015, that was the time when there was a guy, Vineet, called Jihadi John, who was famous for chopping off the heads of British hostages, and he was British himself. And this woman has been interviewed many times, and she has neither any remorse nor any pain for what she's done, nor does she feel sorry for the victims of such terrorism. So under those circumstances, it is one thing to say, and I agree, that she was 15, she may have been misled, etc. But had she behaved differently, had she said from day one, I've made a huge mistake, I hate this place, I want to come back. She didn't say that, possibly because they would have killed her in any case. But then subsequently, in subsequent interviews, she didn't show any remorse. So why is the BBC taking up her case and focusing on such individuals, whereas on the other hand, they seem to have pleasure in portraying the Khalistanis who are attacking our diaspora in India, or the ISI-funded Mirpuris who are organizing demonstrations against our High Commission, etc. There is a mismatch here, and the BBC is actually doing its reputation great harm, because this is not investigative journalism at all. This is highly biased journalism. It's not investigative. It is sentimental on the side of jihad, and coming from a British public funded organization, it doesn't show even the entire United Kingdom in a good light.
Right. Rashmi, what do you make of this? The BBC trying to be this woke organization that basically understands the concerns of every party that has suffered. But, what about the suffering of the United Kingdom itself at the hands of terrorism, and of, brandishing this girl as somebody who's perhaps a victim of a situation or the system here?
Well, I think it's really concerning to watch the kind of reporting that's coming out of the BBC, especially since the report, the findings of the report of the Home Office has been made public. The report titled Prevent, which clearly said that there's been concerted efforts of spreading radicalism within the UK using propaganda, and that it's had effect, on ground effect in the UK, and it's an actual threat to the national security and integrity of the nation, especially when such reports are coming out as findings of studies commissioned by the Home Office and accepted by the sitting Home Secretary. I think BBC just going outright and producing such documentaries to whitewash the seriousness of radicalism, to whitewash the effects of radicalism on the British society is actually very concerning. And I think it deserves an investigation, just to ascertain why this is happening, whether it is it's being pushed by people who are employees of the BBC with an agenda, or if there are deeper overturns to why this is happening, especially when the administration is clearly not inclined to believe or to harp on to the same agenda as the BBC, because you can clearly see that the Conservative government, which is currently in power, in no way endorses such findings, in no way has accepted such findings or spoken similar language. Then it really deserves an investigation to find out why this kind of investigation, why this kind of reporting is coming out of the BBC, where the inspiration lies, and who's supporting this kind of a thing. Because Shamima Begum is one person who's never shown any remorse to her actions, and she's done everything willfully. And in fact, I think there were two other people who accompanied her, and it shows a larger problem. It's clearly a display of the larger problem, that is grooming of young people towards radicalism in the UK. And bringing her back would only sort of undermine the whole problem, and it would just go on to show that you can go on and do whatever, and right and wrong does not really matter. So I think that is a great problem, and the BBC really needs to be investigated on that line.
Major Mohammed Ali Shah also joins us on the conversation. Ali, on one hand the BBC wants to vilify our Prime Minister, blow out of proportion things which have already been settled by the apex court of a democratic country. And on the other hand, they want to, in fact, somehow normalize what was done by this woman as some sort of a mistake, which can be rectified and corrected. How skewed and how idiotic is this stance by any organization, let alone the BBC?
Exactly. It's laughable, actually. It's laughable, exactly, what they are doing. I don't know why they are determined in trying to lose credibility, in trying to lose the subscribers. I don't know what the matter with them is, why it is suicidal, it's self-destructive completely. Now, coming, Vineet, right now at this point of time, if you can see from my background, I'm out at an event somewhere at a hotel where the principals of a leading school of the country have got together. And here I was here to give a talk. Now, when I told them I just need to excuse myself for half an hour, come out, because I have to speak live on Shamima Begum. And they're like, who's that? What? What has she done? Who's that? Who's that? Who's that? So I was like, I don't know. So that is the question. And she has seen the expression. They were like, who's that? That's exactly how they reacted. So the very fact when a channel, it used to be very credible at one time, when BBC fans a fire to people like Shamima Begum and to radicalism, it really it is heartening. It is very, very sad. Secondly, coming back to the point of the Prime Minister, you said, I don't see the point. Why and how? What logic is it? After 20 years, a documentary is made. After 20 years. If the timing was then, okay, it could have been felt that, okay, there is something to it perhaps. Now the very fact that, what's the point? No point. And it's the point. I can see the other panelists, you're laughing at, they mentioned, who's that about Shamima Begum? So they are.
Okay, Ali, this is not a laughing matter. Ali, this is not a laughing matter. Please take this seriously.
I agree. But the very fact is, Shamima Begum, they are promoting her. The poster, I'm not a beast. So it's not a laughing matter, I understand. But it is laughable that They are promoting by making posters that I'm not a beast. No one is born a criminal. No one is born a terrorist. No one is born. So people, it is circumstances. It's for everyone. It is the same for everyone. Everyone is brainwashed. If she says she was in love and that's how she turned to terrorism, but that is not excuse. That is no excuse for a channel, for any channel. Now, I'm not talking about BBC, for any channel to promote radicalism. It is, and I apologize for laughing because I found it really ridiculous that a channel promoting such a kind of a thing. It is shocking, actually. So I was trying to be sarcastic rather than, so please don't misunderstand my laughter on that, please. And yes, it is, so I do not really stand for a propagation of such kind of a thing. I find it utter bunkum, utter nonsense what the channel is doing right now.
Rajalakshmi Joshi also joins us on the broadcast to give us more details and her thoughts on what she feels is going on over here. Rajalakshmi, BBC, once considered to be a credible organization that only dealt in truth, is now bordering on dealing with topics and criteria which are absolutely ludicrous.
Good afternoon, Vineet. And yes, this is a very serious matter, and we have been seeing a lot of very grave incidents happening in the UK, especially over the last so many weeks. So this, I think, is something that BBC seems to have completely lost the plot, and they're just losing more and more credibility every day. And going by the kind of documentaries that they are producing, I would say that there is something very seriously lacking in the way that they are approaching the BBC, the supposedly very authentic or something that most of our left-wing liberals, they think that this is something that is the most credible way of journalism or something. So what I see is that a lot of these European countries, they have been going for this thing of diversity, and they're talking about secularism, etc., by which they have gone into a lot of very liberal migration laws, etc. So what I'm completely for diversity and inclusivity and all of those things, but then there has to be some line between what exactly are you allowing people to promote in the name of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and even about the religious views. If you look at some of the YouTube videos that keep floating around of people, educated people from the UK, who talk, Muslims I'm talking about, who talk about extremely regressive things about how women should behave, etc., you can understand the kind of radicalization that's going on. And it is sad to see that something, somebody like the BBC is actually giving a platform, and they're promoting these kind of views. They're actually giving a platform to somebody who talks about how they call themselves as a victim after joining the IS, and she has absolutely no remorse about all the killings that happened in different places due to terrorist incidents. And then she says that, okay, it's all over and done with, so you should forget about it. But she talks about herself as if she was the victim, and she had absolutely, she is not responsible for any of that. In fact, she actually says that that was as a result of whatever killings were happening in Syria and Turkey. So she is kind of justifying all those terror incidents. And BBC is actually giving a platform to these kind of statements. And then when you look at how BBC also came up with this documentary on the Gojra riots, I mean, when you put all of it together, it's shocking how that kind of a narrative where all over the world they seem to be going anti-India, they seem to be going anti-Hinduism, anti-Hindutva. There seems to be some kind of a very radical kind of a movement in the European countries, and especially in some of these organizations like the BBC. So we need to look very seriously into who is funding these organizations and how they have the audacity to go into all these kind of documentaries, in spite of the fact that the British Prime Minister, the UK Prime Minister, Mr. Rishi Sunak, he stood up strongly against the BBC documentary on Modi ji. And in spite of that, they come out with this 10 series podcast, and then they come out with this horrible documentary on a jihadi bride. I mean, that is absolutely, they have lost complete credibility with it.
Ambassador Mukherjee, let's also talk about the fact that, this is an organization, this is a channel which is viewed worldwide. It's been respected for decades now. There are also, talks and murmurs about it being a Chinese stooge now. But at the same time, how, what explains this stance that they have taken, that they can go horribly wrong about a democracy that is perhaps the brightest spot in the world today when it comes to growth and economy, and give some sort of a crying shoulder to a cause that has tormented the entire world, including India and the United Kingdom?
It's not the first time that the BBC has been critical about India. There has been a negative narrative emanating, whether it's from BBC or from The Economist or from The Guardian, that I would put down to a post-colonial complex. The BBC is a public-funded organization, but it gets private funding for programs. And right now, one of the most interesting questions is, where did the private funding come for the Modi Part 1 and Part 2? As far as the continuous slanted bias against India is concerned, it could also mean that the BBC is actually being supported by the Labour Party, which wants to bring down Rishi Sunak and is therefore trying in every way to spoil the relationship between India and the United Kingdom during the period that Rishi Sunak is PM, so that many issues, including the FTA, does not get concluded. Otherwise, there can be no reason for this continuous slant against India, or for that matter, these kind of documentaries, for instance, about the jihadi bride. The BBC earlier used to be famous for actually producing documentaries regarding women's rights. I would think that they would be better advised to, let's say, produce a documentary about Afghan women struggling to get educated in Kandahar. They could do interviews with Afghan women who want to get educated. If they really want to be progressive and support women's causes, they can do that. They can go to Islamic countries where they have the clout and they can produce such documentaries. Nobody is asking them to produce a documentary which, in a way, whitewashes the crimes committed by this young woman when she went there, and the fact that she has no remorse. And is the BBC also blind to the fact that should the United Kingdom allow her to come back, which they will not, she could be a threat to national security, because she may have been brainwashed by the IS, and she could either be used as a human bomb, or she could be used for many other purposes which are inimical to Britain's national security. So the British Broadcasting Corporation, this is not Doordarshan or India, should at least have some concept, some perspective of Britain's national security interests, if we in India sitting on NewsX can have that. So I think that they have really gone too far on this matter. But as far as the anti-India slant is concerned, Vineet, I think that corrective measures are being taken, and this is not going to go on for long, because as they say, it's not only the Chinese who have deep pockets, many people do. If it's a question of giving private funding to BBC in order to have planted documentaries against India, well, what's stopping others from doing the same? So this actually further diminishes the credibility of BBC, that it's up for sale. I'll give some private funding, you do a nasty one for my enemy. My enemy gives some private funding, he does a nasty one on me. This is not how a credible organization, which, as you rightly pointed out, used to represent the highest standards of investigative journalism when I was growing up in India, this is not the kind of reputation I'm sure that it would want. So I think the corrective measures are required, and I am informed privately that corrective measures are being considered. Vineet.
Absolutely. And Rashmi, perhaps BBC is under the misconception that, they are still the world's police, and under the garb of this woke journalism, they are in fact doing more harm to the people of the United Kingdom, as well as the United Kingdom's relationship with other countries, specifically India.
You're absolutely right. I think the BBC trying to meddle in issues pertaining to other countries has actually soured relationships between the UK and other countries, irrespective of the sitting administration in the UK taking a contrary stand. So it's actually been doing a lot more harm to the country itself. And secondly, I think it's been doing a lot of harm to itself. A lot of the people I know in the UK are actually very unhappy with the way that the BBC is reporting, and they are all threatening to cancel their subscriptions. A lot of the people I know have actually cancelled their subscriptions, and a lot of the people turning up at these protests in front of the BBC are not just people from other country who the BBC has targeted, but also people from within the country who do not agree with the kind of stance it is taking. Because after all, the BBC gave a podcast to Shamima Begum. That's what it did. It gave a podcast to someone who is not, in any way apologetic of her actions or, the places she's been. And this actually, did not sit well with the people of the UK. In fact, what the BBC has been doing with respect to Shamima Begum has actually been a kind of a soft campaign to actually compel the administration to welcome her back to the country, which is not sitting well with the people of the UK, to be very honest. And it is actually, on the larger scale, it is actually sidelining the voices of people like Nadia Murad, who are actually Nobel Peace Laureates, who have actually survived the sort of abuses of the ISIS and who have been actually speaking out against it. So this kind of selective platforming is also not sitting well with people, and the hypocrisy has been called out time and again, and also in the West. So I think this kind of overall criticism that the British Broadcasting Corporation is currently attracting will sooner or later bring them back to their senses, and they will be compelled to either course correct or shut down. Because currently they seem to be serving no purpose whatsoever, either for the British people or the British administration, as they were rightfully supposed to do. They seem to be just harping on the agendas of the few masters who seem to be paying them, or who seem to have taken control of the corporation, which is actually very sad, because they represent a lot more for the United Kingdom than just that.
All right, almost out of time. We'll take concluding thoughts from Mohammad Ali Shah and Rajalakshmi Joshi. Ali, coming to you first, what should be done about the BBC? In fact, by putting out such inane documentaries, they've already lost credibility. But that day is not far when the BBC could be staring down at bankruptcy as well, because the people in the United Kingdom will decide to not pay for the subscription that they are used to.
Vineet, yes, they lose credibility then. I think glorifying a terrorist is the most ridiculous thing that you can do. Anyone can do. We have a large responsibility on our hands, all of us sitting on this panel. Ambassador Mukherjee, Rashmi Samant, Rajalakshmi Joshi, myself, you, everyone, because we are influencers. A lot of people, millions of people would be watching us, they would be forming their opinion based on our opinions. Now, when a channel glorifies a terrorist, what example does it set? I think it's utter ridiculous. Now, what can be done? People, as Rashmi said, people she knows have already decided not to subscribe to BBC further. Well, that is their way of journalism. And let me tell you, we had very high regard for BBC. I also had very high regard for them. All of us had. In fact, BBC was considered to be the #1 in the world. That wow, what responsible journalism. But
quickly, Ali, quickly. We have all our time. Quickly, please.
Right, but these kind of things, I mean, unfortunately, I don't see what it's a personal choice. What we can we can do about it is we choose our channels on our own. We choose what channel we wish to subscribe, which channels we do not wish to subscribe to.
Rajalakshmi Joshi.
Vineet, we can't really do much about what some channel in the UK does. But then from our end, as Indians, as Indian media, what channels like yours can do is that we bring out a positive, information or some countering information that actually sets right the narrative. So, like in the case of that hit job that they did on PM Modi, in those kind of cases, that is the kind of a responsible journalism that Indian media can do. Now, as far as BBC or what we can do vis-a-vis the British, is that we can put a strong kind of a word towards the British government, and at the same time, if they start losing the subscriptions, then obviously they will get the message right. And I think we need to actually strongly condemn all these kind of documentaries, because then it also affects the viewership in India also, and because they had a lot of credibility. So even today, a lot of people, they definitely think that their media is a lot more credible than our media for whatever reason. So that, I think, we need to be able to counter it with positivity. That is the only way to counter negativity, Vineet.
All right, that's a good point. Well, this is something which I'm very positive will be taken up in the near future as well, because BBC, as we all know, has become a repeat offender when it comes to basically challenging the universal norms that everyone aspires to today. Perhaps they have a lot of catching up to do.
I'm not sorry, I have zero sympathy for this woman. Nothing I've read over the past 24 hours has made me change my mind. I just feel like I'm being asked to feel sympathy to an ISIS defector who joined a terrorist organisation who blew up young kids in the Manchester Arena bombings. I mean, am I wrong? Am I missing something, Brendan?
No, you're not wrong at all. And, let's be clear, first of all, about what this story, this latest revelation does and doesn't tell us. It doesn't say that she was trafficked from Britain to Syria by someone who was informing the Canadians. What it actually says is that she went on her own volition all the way to Turkey with the express intention of joining the ISIS death cult in Syria. And it was this guy who helped her at the last stage of the journey to cross from Turkey into Syria. And he was a guy who at the same time was giving information to the Canadian government because he wanted Canadian citizenship at some point. So it's completely untrue the way some people are spinning it, which is that she was trafficked and groomed from Bethnal Green to Syria by this guy who was also working with the Canadians. She went there because she wanted to join a death cult which was enslaving women, murdering Christians, and slaughtering the good people of Syria if they didn't believe the same things that ISIS believed. And we have to get real about how serious her act of betrayal to our country was.
Because, Brendan, there's definitely a push, isn't there, by the elites in this country to try and make us forgive Begum, and it feels like they're not going to let this rest. I believe there's a new BBC podcast coming up where she declares she's not a monster. I mean, I just feel like this is a narrative that is going to run and run. Perhaps, I guess, hoping that a Labour government, a soft-touch Labour government, a soft-on-crime Labour government, a soft-on-terrorism Labour government may allow her re-entry to the country.
Oh, yeah, there is a grotesque attempt to paint her as a victim. I find it really genuinely quite repulsive. People use words like grooming and trafficking to describe how she ended up in Syria. I've seen more sympathy for Shamima Begum among the British left than I have ever seen them express for the Yazidi women who were literally trafficked by ISIS, who were enslaved, who were raped, and who were murdered by the movement that Shamima willingly joined. I've literally heard people on the left in this country I've seen them shed more tears for Shamima and her predicament than they did for those Yazidi women. I've also seen them talk about grooming in relation to Shamima Begum far more than they have about the grooming gangs in other parts of the UK, which targeted young women and raped young women as well. So they have an incredibly distorted moral compass where they are desperate to depict Shamima as a victim of Islamophobia, a victim of British racism. That's apparently why we ripped up her citizenship. And they are painting her as almost like this sympathetic figure who lacks all agency. She didn't know what she was doing. And I think they are undermining the way in which she behaved like a traitor, and she turned her back on this country and joined one of the most evil organizations in the world. We cannot lose sight of that.
I want to bring in now Chris Daw QC, who is a barrister, broadcaster and author of Justice on Trial, who agrees that Shamima has been brainwashed, and Mesa Gifford, a human rights activist and anti-ISIS campaigner who quit his job as a trader in London to join a Kurdish group fighting the terrorist group in Syria. Great to have you here. You've obviously been listening to this conversation. Mesa, where do you stand on this?
Well, my sympathy lies entirely with the people of Syria and Iraq who have seen their homes, their entire country brutalized by ISIS. I agree with MI5 when they describe Shamima as a real and credible threat. And I think we've all been warned by the words of Sajid Javid just this morning when he quite forcefully rejected any notion that what we've done in the case of Shamima Begum was in any way inappropriate. At the end of the day, the British public have to come first. And unless we actually deal with the problem of returning jihadis at source in Syria and Iraq, we are at real risk of many more people, apart from Shamima Begum, coming back to the UK.
But Chris Dorr, you say actually Mace is wrong. Shamima Begum is a victim and we should be treating her like a victim. Why?
Well, anyone who has a 15-year-old daughter or indeed a 15-year-old son knows that at that age they are utterly incapable of making sensible choices for themselves. And when grooming gangs, which ISIS was a prime candidate and a prime example of the most extraordinary forms of manipulation and grooming of young people and young women in particular, when they get involved with children of that age, just as when drug dealers get involved with 15-year-olds, or indeed sexual groomers get involved with 15-year-olds, they do all sorts of things which are extraordinarily damaging to themselves. And the person who suffered the most in all of this is Shamima Begum. She's a young woman who's lost 3 babies who've died. Have we got no human sympathy or no human mercy?
A terrorist group. She joined a terrorist organisation. She knew that they were bombing this country.
What did you do at 15?
At 15, we didn't join a death cult in the desert. I'm sorry.
Well, you may not have got groomed by people who are highly sophisticated and are intent on grooming young Western girls to come there to mother their children. You didn't get groomed by those people. You no doubt had a very stable and normal upbringing without the influence of gangs and groomers and psychotic murderers. But if my daughter, who's 14, got groomed by a load of terrorists, I would be out there trying to bring her home. I wouldn't be trying to just besmirch her as some sort of evil human being. She's not. She was a child, she was groomed, and she should come back to the country of her birth so that she can face justice.
She's no longer a child.
Like everybody else.
Sorry, she's 22
it's
years
rather
old.
interesting,
She's a
Mesa,
22-year-old woman that's been there for 5 years.
Mesa, if you go first, and then I'll bring you back in, Tasnim. Mesa, you step in and then I'll come to you.
We're no longer talking. We're no longer talking about a young lady. We're talking about a woman that's been in Syria and Iraq for more than 5 years now. She's 22 years old. We don't know what kind of military and psychological training this young lady has gone through. As I said, we have to listen to the authorities on this one. We have to listen to the experts. MI5 have said she's a real and credible threat. Her appeal for the loss of her citizenship has gone all the way to the Supreme Court. So the British government has got the best legal advice on this. They've all agreed it's entirely appropriate that she lose her citizenship. The security services think that she's a threat. The British public no longer want her to return back to the UK. So this is actually a pretty open and shut case. And we're being distracted by your, I'm sorry to say, absurd statement where you say Shamima Begum's the victim in all this, when 6,000 Yazidi girls are still missing, where young boys and men in their thousands were gunned down
of the Manchester bombing as well. We cannot forget the 22 victims of the Manchester bombing. But look, Tasnim, I want to give you the final word. You're obviously Shamima Begum's family lawyer. What's your plan now? What are you going to do next? What are the family expecting to happen? And do they have hope?
Well, Shamima Begum's lawyer is Gareth Pearce, so they're bringing the case in the Syriac courts, and that's trundling on. The point that I wanted to come in on was that Shamima Begum was 15 when she joined a terrorist organisation. That's true. But Mesa's an adult human being who joined the YPG, which is a terrorist affiliate organisation, according to Turkey and the United States, which is affiliate to the PKK.
I'm sorry, no, it's not.
The UK government also had arrested a number of people who joined the YPG. So are you suggesting on one hand that UK police were wrong to arrest people who joined the YPG, the same organisation you joined? And you were an adult and you conducted military operations in a sovereign country, which is Syria, against the sovereign country's interest. What you conducted, Mesa, in Syria was terrorism against Syria.
All right,
That's
look, we're
entirely
speaking about Shamima Begum tonight, but we will continue this debate. Thank you so much all for being here. That was Tasmin Akumji, Shamima Begum's family lawyer, Chris Dorr QC, the barrister and author of Justice on Trial, who says it's Shamima Begum who's the victim, despite a twisted rehabilitation attempt by the British bashing corporation that saw her become a magazine star and handed a podcast to claim she is not a monster. Sanity prevailed today, justice was done, and the priority of our safety was for once put first. Shamima Begum will not return to the UK for now at least. That was the decision of the Special Immigration Appeals Commission, which rejected the ISIS terrorist legal challenge after MI5 insisted she still poses a major security risk. And surely there can no longer be any doubt about that. I've not been sucked in by the BBC and other hard-left organisations to convince us the teenager who left the UK to join ISIS after the most brutal beheading of Brits were broadcast to the world and then was reported to have helped sew jihadists into their suicide vests. I'm not convinced by the BBC that she is somehow now a victim. So tonight, I wanted to compare the real Shamima. This is Shamima before the BBC, before the PR campaign. I wanted to compare that Shamima to the new and improved sanitised version. So watch this.
I don't regret it because it's changed me as a person. It's made me stronger, tougher.
I always, in the back of my mind, was like questioning my decision, but I knew there was nothing I could do about it, so I just had to keep like persevering and going on.
In the Manchester Arena, you must have heard about that attack. What did you think about that?
It's a two-way thing, really, because women and children are being killed back in the Islamic State right now.
I was in love with the idea of ISIS, so I just always made excuses for them.
Yeah, I will admit I was the one that made the choice. Even though I was only 15 years old, I could make my own decisions back there. I do have the like mentality to make my own decisions.
I didn't feel British because I feel like I wasn't able to be British even though I wanted to be, if that makes sense. I didn't feel like I was accepted by society either because of racism and other things.
I saw a beheaded head in the bin.
In the bins?
Yeah, it's through the bin.
What was that like when you first saw that? These are the heads of captives?
Yeah, didn't faze me at all.
I'm not a bad person. I'm not this person that they think I am being perceived as in the media. You know, I'm just so much more than ISIS, and I'm so much more than everything that I've been through.
Heads in the bins didn't faze her at all. I know the real Shamima Begum. No wonder Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary who made the decision, publicly declared he was convinced that keeping her out of the UK is the correct one.
Not going to get into details of the case, but what I will say is that you certainly haven't seen what I saw. Let me say this, I think if you did know what I knew, as I say, because you are sensible, responsible people, you would have made exactly the same decision. Of that, I have no doubt.
Javid stood by that position today. But the risk posed by our weak legal system has not gone away, with Mr. Justice J today accepting that there was a, quote, credible suspicion that Begum was a victim of sex trafficking to Syria. He added that there was considerable force that the Home Secretary was unsympathetic to conclude Begum travelled to Syria voluntarily. Well, I reject that. Yes, she was 15 years old, but Begum knew exactly what she was doing when joining ISIS, as the MI5 witness told the trial. No one hoodwinked her. The only reason she's trying to come back now is because the despicable caliphate collapsed. Just imagine the consequences if Begum had won today. There would be a flood of dangerous jihadists back into Britain. The principles at stake are important, but so too is our safety. Growing numbers of British extremists are being drawn back to Syria to join jihadist groups. That's according to today's Daily Telegraph. Now, these traitors must know that they will never be able to return and could face life rotting at the Al-Raj camp in northern Syria alongside Begum. Though they deny it, Begum, and I feel sick about this actually, she's still using our so-called public service broadcaster to spread her propaganda, with the latest episode of her sick podcast this week continuing her futile bid for rehabilitation, expecting sympathy from us for the fact she fled with friends who went on to lose their lives.
It's just like a constant reminder, you know, that she could be alive today, but she's not. And in a way, it may be my fault. I don't know the word, but like if I had said, you know, I don't want to go to ISIS, guys, don't come either. Or if I told the police the truth, maybe she would still be alive. You know, maybe we would have never gone to Syria. Maybe they would have never spoken to me again because they would see me as a snitch, but they'd still be alive. And that would be enough for me.
Diddums. Because what about the victims of the Manchester Arena bombing? What about Alan Henning and David Haynes? Begum doesn't give a damn about them. She never talks about them. Of course, her lawyers fought back outside court today by vowing the legal fight is, quote, nowhere near over. But the Home Office insisted the government's priority remains maintaining the safety and security of the UK, and we will robustly defend any decision made in doing so. They must, because any return by Shamima Begum marks a clear and present danger to Brits.
The outcome that we face is that no British child who has been trafficked outside the UK,
no British child who has been trafficked outside the UK
will be protected by the British state if the Home Secretary invokes national security.
Yes, I mean, in terms of the legal fight, that's nowhere near over. We're not going to go into details about exactly what that means at this stage. I think what else this judgment calls out for, though, is some courage and some leadership from the Home Secretary to look at this case afresh in light of the clear and compelling factual findings that this court has made.
There's no limit to the challenges, but in our view they include the government taking on the responsibility of conducting its own review.
The decision by the Site Court today denying Shamima Begum's appeal is of course incredibly disappointing for her and her family and all those people who expressed support for her right to return home over the years. The court did accept that Shamima Begum was a trafficked person. She was groomed at the age of 15 and trafficked for the purpose of sexual exploitation from her home in the UK all the way over to Syria. This fact, however, they considered did not displace the Home Secretary's rights given to him by Parliament to strip her of her citizenship. Now, this is something that we ought to think about as a nation. We've sleepwalked ourselves into a scenario where our politicians now have the powers to reach out into our lives and radically change them. At the same time, our courts have very limited powers, it seems, to revisit those decisions and reverse them in a direction which is morally attuned. As a country, we now stand almost exclusively alone in the idea that we don't have to take responsibility for the citizens that travel abroad. Every other nation has revisited their position on that and reversed it. The fact that we stand alone amongst nations where we don't take responsibility for our citizens is something we really ought to think about. And any next government that comes into power, we, the citizenry, should really examine what powers we've given them and whether we're comfortable for them to continue to have those powers when the courts have limited ability to keep them in check. Something to think about.
I want to ask you about what the former Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, said following this interview. He implied that there's actually much more about what Shamima did when she was in ISIS than the public are aware of. And he said very clearly, if the public were to become aware of what she did, we would agree with his decision to strip her of British citizenship. What's he referring to?
Well, we don't really have any idea. So it's in his hands as to whether he makes that public or not. And we say that it isn't insurmountable for a formula to be agreed, whereby information about the alleged accusations can come forward in open court without giving up sources. So it's more suspicious that Sajid Javid says, look, if only you saw what I saw, then you would agree with me. Well, the fact is that, you know, it's within his power to let us see what he's seen, rather than just make accusations that don't have supporting evidence behind them.
You, on the record, deny that Shamima was aware of the Manchester bombing and also these allegations that she actually helped suicide bombers get into their clothes in order to go on suicide attacks, which has been claimed?
So I haven't said that. Shamima makes those claims. In terms of the actual the suicide vests, those she's very stringently and forcefully denied any involvement with from the very off. Now, we recall that though that information was supposed to be securitized, according to the Home Secretary, but it actually leaked from his office to a journalist. And so the idea that that's very important information that was protected is somewhat belied by the fact it was leaked to the press itself. So what we'd like to know is what the basis of that assessment was, because Shamima very clearly denies that.
Are you behind this makeover, Tasnim? What's this all about? When we first saw Shamima, she was in the hijab. All of a sudden, she's looking like a Western woman. Is this all a PR ploy that you've very carefully crafted to try and get public support?
Sorry, that's a pretty wild accusation. I've never actually spoken to Shamima Begum. I'm her family's lawyer.
I'm just asking the question. I'm asking the question.
Right, well, I'm a lawyer, not Jimmy Chu, so no.
What do you think it's about? And do you think it's genuine?
Sorry, in terms of a makeover?
Well, why does she look so different? Why is she dressed all of a sudden like a Westerner?
Well, I have no idea. I mean, you'll have to ask her if she's changed her style. I mean, there was a time where there was a Shamima Begum, who was a normal schoolgirl from Bethnal Green in London, who didn't dress like you've seen her when she first appeared in 2019 on the front pages in a burqa and a niqab. She was a normal schoolgirl. She was then radicalized, and she went to a war zone where ISIS imposed a certain dress code on pain of punishment through beatings and ultimately execution. So at that point, she was obviously radicalized, and she was wearing the clothing of the region. So we're entirely, in a phase where she may, because of the new influences around her, in a much more liberal camp, with the help of the SDF, who spent a lot of time with her, have reverted back to a pre-2015 position.
Can you understand the skepticism of someone like me? She wants to get back into the UK. She's appearing on a populist breakfast television show, being interviewed by Richard Madeley and Susanna Reid. This feels like some sort of PR campaign. And she's also taking back previous statements that she made. I mean, when she was first interviewed in the camp initially in Syria, she said that the Manchester Arena bombing, which killed all of those Brits, including an 8-year-old girl, going to an Ariana Grande concert, she said that was justified. Now she says she didn't even know about the Manchester Arena bombing.
So this is the type of exercise that's normal, is where you take somebody's words from before and you compare them to where they are now, and you look for consistency and you look for inconsistency. The issue here, though, is that you also have to look at the context. So it's incorrect to say that she's in the same camp in Syria. She isn't. When she was first interviewed by Anthony Lloyd for the Times, so she was in Al.
And she's moved camps.
Right. So, but the context of that's important. Al Hol camp had 80,000 people in it and was almost lawless. It was effectively controlled by hardcore ISIS adherents, women, who had a track record of setting fire to other women and children, murdering them if they didn't support ISIS. So in terms of what she could say openly in that camp, that was very, very narrow, what she could say. She couldn't say too much. She'd subsequently then been moved to Al Roj camp, which has got 2,500 people in it, much more securely controlled, with a very low element of hardened ISIS supporters. There are no burnings of people, human beings, and tents there. So in this new context in Al Roj, then she can be a lot more freer with what she says. But you rightly state, what she says needs examination, and it needs examination free of threat, which really wouldn't happen in a camp surrounded by 80,000 potentially ISIS adherents still.
Why do you think that the British people should accept Shamima Begum returning to the UK? We don't trust her. We believe that she left the country knowing that she was joining a terrorist organisation. And we have the former Home Secretary, current Cabinet Minister Sajid Javid saying stripping her of British citizenship was perfectly legal. Why on earth should the British public accept this woman setting foot back in this country again?
Well, you see, we're no longer under Roman rule, so we don't decide the fate of human beings by populist thumbs up or thumbs down in a gladiatorial games. We have the rule of law, which is what happens in courts, and that is much more devoid of the sort of populist emotion that goes on. The reason we have a rule of law is because our society's evolved from just the gladiatorial aspect in a modern society, and we have a separation of powers, and there are consequences to our decisions. So, for example, with Shamima Begum, she's certainly born in the UK, brought up in the UK, educated in the UK, radicalised in the UK. So she's a Brit, really. The way that Sajid Javid decides to palm her off onto Bangladesh, well, Bangladesh is simply not going to accept that. And now with Sajid Javid's decision set a precedent. So where we've got terrorists or extremists who come from other countries, like Abu Qatada, Abu Hamza and what have you, we have exported them. We've basically said that the countries they came from have to take them back, rightly so. But those countries may now take a very dim view of that approach and just adopt the same approach that Britain's taken. They will simply say now that, well, sorry, too bad, it's your problem. You've taken them on the same basis that you've forced Shamima Begum onto another country. We'll force ours back onto yours and not take them back. So we'll end up in a sort of tit-for-tat scenario with countries blocking the repatriation or the forced repatriation of their own homegrown terrorists and extremists.
Tasnim, I just need to ask you why you tweeted a picture of the Taliban as the Afghanistan government fell with the lyrics of a Thin Lizzy song, "The Boys Are Back in Town." Do you accept that was highly inappropriate?
Well, the song is actually from 1977. It's to do with the Quality Street gang from Manchester, who were a criminal gang, who then returned back to Manchester from a sojourn. So I thought it was rather appropriate that a small criminal gang have now gone back to their hometown, and that's where the comparator was, really.
Okay, so you weren't supporting the Taliban in any way, to clarify?
Well, you'll find that Guido Fawkes, around the same time, actually tweeted exactly the same thing. And to a lot of hilarious acclaim, apparently. So he, being a right-wing Twitterati, is seen in one vein, but it seems that if I, with a different complexion, tweet something very similar, then it's read in a completely different context. So I find that interesting.
Because of the nature of this case, all three families were being assisted by a lawyer who specialised in terrorism offences. I went to meet up with him to find out what was at stake for them all.
Why do these families need a solicitor? Why do they need representation?
Well, the problem is that one wrong step and it becomes a terrorism case for them as well, in that the kids have gone out and they've joined a terrorist organisation. Now, any assistance that those families give to those kids who are now, on one view, members of a terrorist organisation would itself be a terrorist offence.
The lawyer was on his way to visit Mr. Abbas, who'd been called to give evidence to a panel of British parliamentarians who wanted to examine what had happened in this case. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Bernard Hogan Howe, would also be answering questions. Under UK terror laws, the girls could now face any number of charges. Mr. Abbas needed to make sure that 10 years in prison wouldn't await Amira and scare her from coming home.
What's our goal? What do we want?
What we want is back home, safely, my daughter.
Look, you told me about your daughter. She's scared of the dark.
Yeah.
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 So for your daughter to do something as crazy as this, she must have been quite.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, scared. Yeah.
Okay. What do you want?
My daughter to come back safely.
Where?
Not in prison, but in home.
Why?
Because she's already.
Just remember that and keep saying that.
Okay.
Yeah?
She's
I want
a
my
child.
Daughter, I want my daughter back home, not in prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
she's a child and a victim. Okay.
Yeah. Full stop.
Full stop. See? Let's bring her back.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Is it possible that there was indoctrination out of school, unknown clearly to the family?
As I know my daughter, it's very difficult to predicate why they leave this country. That's why we are left on middle of nowhere. We really in trouble. Why?
It's specific to these parents that they don't know the answer to that question. In the same way that a parent whose child has been taken away, let's say, falls in love with a teacher and runs off to France, does not know how that happened, but it is shocking to them.
Runaway's father joined hate rally. A father who blamed police for failing to stop his teenage daughter fleeing to Syria to join ISIS once appeared alongside convicted terrorists at a hate-filled London protest. Abbas Hossein was seen at the front of the demonstration at which American and Israeli flags were burned and marchers called for jihad. His face twisted in fury, Abbas Hossein punches his fist into the air and launches into an Islamic war cry. Burn, burn USA, he yells from his prime spot at the front of one of the most notorious rallies in recent times.
What was it about Islamic State that attracted you? What did you like about it?
The way they showed how you can go, they'll take care of you, you can have your own family there, you can do anything. You're living under Islamic law.
Did you know what Islamic State were doing when you left for Syria? Because they had beheaded people, there were executions.
Yeah, I knew about those things and I was okay with it.
You didn't question that?
No.